into our project. So let me open up the Explorer here. And inside of the project directory, I'm going to just copy over from over here. I'm just going to copy an image directory. Now in the show notes, I'm going to give you access to the images so you can just come and download those yourself so that you'll be able to follow along, or you can use your own images. And just in case if you're curious on how I got all of these are all free to use. And if you go to unsplash.com, this is a great resource for being able to search for any kind of images, and they're all free to use. So you could type in coding, and there are all kinds of cool coding pictures that you can use for your own project. So that's definitely a good resource if you're building out websites for others. So let's come back here, and now we have everything working. Now you can see we have the images directory. This is going to have all of those portfolio images, and then it's also going to have all of the logos. Now obviously if you're building this out for your own portfolio, then you're most likely going to want to have your own images and your own logos. These are just projects I personally have worked on, so I'm including these for myself, and eventually I think I will probably take portions of this portfolio and add it to my own application, my own personal portfolio, so I can use that. So those are all the files that we are going to need. So we have our first item on our checklist completely crossed off. We have our files and our architecture all set up. So now with all of that in place, let's move on to the next one, which is the nav bar. So I'm going to get rid of everything here, and I'm going to start building out that nav bar. And before I do anything when I'm building out these kinds of front ends, I first just like to have the content there, because once I have the content, then I can rearrange it. I can see what I actually want to use, and then I can also see how all of the code needs to be arranged. So I know that I have the 2 links. If you remember, we have the 2 links, and we can go and verify that here. So we have these 2 links, and then we have this little just kind of a name. This could be a logo or anything, but for right now I'm just going to have it be text. So I'm just going to add first those things. So I'm going to create a link, and the way you can do that is by giving a href and inside of an a tag. Now, if that sounds like a foreign language, do not worry. An a tag is how you define a hyperlink in HTML. And href is where the link points to. So right now it's going to be index.html, and I'm just going to say home. Now let's copy that, and let's point to our about file. And then here we can just say about. And that's all we need to do. Now let's switch back and let's test this out just to make sure it's working. So there you go. You can see we have home and about. Now if I click on about, you can see it takes us to the about page. So in the very beginning intro, I told you we were going to talk about routing. That is as easy as routing gets in HTML. You really just have to point to the file that you want to reference, and then it'll automatically go there. So if I click home, then it takes me right back to where we were. It takes me to that index page. Now, if you wanted to point to an outside website, so say you wanted to say, I want you to go to Google, then you could just create a link, and instead of just passing the file name, you would pass the full reference. So this is called the absolute path. So you'd pass that, and so now if you click on Google, now it'll actually take you there. So that's how you can work with links, and also how you can implement routing in HTML. So we have our home and our about, and then we just want to have a name here. So I'm going to put this inside of a div, and there I'm just going to give my name. I'll do it in all caps because that's what the designer said to go with. Hit save, and now if I come back here, you can see it has my name. So yeah, this doesn't look anywhere near as good as this one, but that's where the CSS comes in. And so if you've never worked with HTML and CSS, just know that HTML by itself is going to look exactly like this. There's really no style to pure HTML. That's what you need CSS for. So believe it or not, with just the code that we have right here, we're going to be able to create this nav bar, but it's going to take a little bit of work. So let's get started on that, because I told you we were going to be able to get this website done in an hour. So we're going to have to get rocking and rolling here. Okay, very first thing, whenever I'm building out a site that I'm adding some structure to, is I create a container class. So this gives me the ability to manage the entire set of elements on the page. So I'm going to create a container class here, and then I'm going to close off this div at the very end. So if you had not noticed yet, every div needs to have a closing div. So right here you can see that this is the start of the div, but anything that has a start needs to have a finish, just like we have. That's why I added this div here at the bottom. If you forget to add a closing div somewhere in the code, you are going to have some very weird styles. So that's why, even though we have a lot of code to add above this, where all of our portfolio items and everything are going to go, you still want to make sure you always are adding your closing divs, or else you're going to run into some very hard to debug kind of issues. So we have this container class, and that's where our entire application is going to go. Now the nav, though, needs to have its own div. So here I'm going to create another class here, and I'm going to call this nav-wrapper. Now you can call these anything you want. These are just the type of names I personally use when I'm building out applications. So I'm going to, once again, I want to put all of those nav items there. So we need to make sure that we are adding the closing div in the right spot. And then I also am going to, I always indent this, and that is the best practice. So don't have, all of your code lined up without any indentation. If you have elements that are nested inside a parent div like we have right here, then you want to make sure that those are indented. So one thing you may notice if you go back and you look at the page right now, nothing's changed. And the reason for that is divs by themselves don't really do much. The only thing that they do is they will give a line break, which is the reason why this name here is on a line below. But adding these wrapper divs didn't do anything. The only thing that's going to add some different style there is when we go into our CSS file. So that is going to be our nav wrapper. And then inside of here, whenever you're looking at a page and you're looking at a design you need to build, right here you can see that we have our links on the left-hand side, but then on the right-hand side, we have the logo or the site name, or that kind of thing. Whenever I see something like this, my first thought is, okay, how am I going to arrange this in code? And usually the most logical approach is to create divs that these groupings belong into. So in other words, I'm going to create a left column div, and then I'm going to create a right column div. So let's wrap our home and about inside of those. So here I'm going to say left, and I'll just say left side. And then right here, I'll close that div off and then indent it. And then I'm going to just copy this. And on this one, it's going to be right side. And then indent that Once again, this won't have any changes on the site, but what we're doing here is we are wrapping the code up in a way where it's going to make it much more straightforward to select these elements on the page and then add our own custom styles to them. So we are almost there, except I just have a couple more classes that we want to add. So these links shouldn't be all by themselves either.